The level and indeed extent of exports a nation engages in determines her balance of trade. Ultimately, the more goods and services she sends out is related to the extent and depth of her financial solvency, and in turn, how much the country has in external reserves. In a nutshell, more export means more external reserves, or rather more savings for the country. Nigeria has struggled to export more than she imports, and there are many things to consider. On the currency side of things, we need to keep an eye on the value of the currency against international benchmarks, the cost of living, as well as the cost of production. So how can Nigeria change the downward trajectory of its external reserves? Today, it's about Nigeria's external reserves scorecard. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me on today's show is Nnamdi Nwezu. He is the co-managing partner of Commercial Partners. Nnamdi, good to see you again, and thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge.
My pleasure. Good to be here too.
Please check your audio. Let's make sure that we are communicating correctly, because I think there's a bit of an issue. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
All right, there we go. All right, great. So Nnamdi, let's start with this. Nigeria's external reserves have experienced a yo-yo effect with highs and lows, but unfortunately more lows. As of April 16, Nigeria had $35.25 billion in reserves. That fell to $34.23 billion May 31st, and now it's at $33.85 billion as of June 15th. Give us an idea of what is causing this downward trend with Nigeria's external reserves.
Well, with regards to the reserves, we can see that looking at about maybe like a 5-year period, we got to a peak of about 43 billion in 2018, and now we're down to about 35.3, like you mentioned, in 2020. Major causes really would point to things like the drop in crude oil price, which we've seen has continued to fall sharply over the last 4 or 5 years. From the peak of about $134, $135 per barrel, we went all the way down to about $30 per barrel during the COVID crisis, and now back up to about 70. So we've seen a reduction in crude oil price, and also currently we're also experiencing a reduction in output due to the cap placed by OPEC on production to try and steady the price of crude oil. So by the time you look at all of that, you get to realize that we're getting less dollar inflows, because crude oil accounts for roughly about 95 or 96% of our foreign exchange inflows. So as long as that keeps on dwindling, then we'll continue to see pressure on the foreign reserves.
And the things you've mentioned are external factors, and I hope by the end of the show today we'll be able to talk about, are there no factors that Nigeria controls that can actually aid it in increasing its external reserves? But let's take a look at this. In December, the Central Bank of Nigeria noted that further pressure on the external reserves as worsening current account balance, decline in oil prices, as you noted, and a risk aversion on the part of investors, which continue to affect capital inflows, remained major risk. These are all coming to pass in different ways. Nigeria does not control the price of oil, but we do control our business environment. Why do you think investors are showing an aversion to Nigeria right now that is leading also to affecting our external reserves?
Well, I think it can point to 2 things currently. One would be the fact that we are still basically more or less like a monoproduct economy, where a big chunk of, like I mentioned before, the currency that we receive from government and revenues comes from crude oil. And considering the fact that a lot of the world is trying to move away from crude to things like clean energy and coal, some people look at it and wonder if Nigeria long-term will be able to meet its financial obligations. Then the second thing, which is a major factor, has also been the security challenges being faced. Nobody wants to go into a country where safety of their staff and safety of investments will not be guaranteed. And we all know what's been happening over the last 4 or 5 years with regards to upheaval and unrest and attacks by bandits or Boko Haram across the country. Typically, it would be restricted to one region, but now we've seen violence spread across practically every region in Nigeria, which doesn't give a very encouraging investment or doesn't help with a very encouraging investment climate.
When we mention foreign reserves, it may seem like something that doesn't affect the Nigerian on the street, but really that's not so. Before we go further into this and get into the currency conversation, what is the impact of these fluctuations and particularly dips in Nigeria's foreign reserves on Nigerians on the streets, on me and you when we go to the market or we go to the supermarket? How does it affect us?
Well, the truth about it is that in as much as we say that a lot of the Nigerians on the streets who would fall into maybe the poor or the lower class people with regards to earnings don't necessarily import a lot of items, right? They depend a lot locally on locally manufactured goods. But still, you would still have the fact that you have raw materials which are used to produce those goods. And those items being imported require dollars. So as long as the currency continues to weaken, then you would see inflation start to affect them with regards to those things. Then if you look at those who are even in the middle class and the upper class and also on the streets, then you would see that you have imported inflation with regards to food and all sorts of various items, right? So then you look at power and the fact that the cost of power keeps going up, cost of petrol goes up. Why? Because we've seen the currency weaken, and that makes it more expensive when petrol is being imported into the country, because, I mean, we still refine petroleum products offshore. And that hits especially the man on the streets, because at the end of the day, it affects transport costs, and most of these people can't afford diesel generators. So those that can afford generators use petrol-powered gens. So you see that hitting them in the pockets also. So you have inflationary pressure, and then you have increase in transportation costs, and then you have increase in items, though locally manufactured, but depend a lot on imported raw materials, which naturally would be affected by dwindling reserves, which means less currency, which means less dollars, yes, to defend the currency, and a weakening naira. So these are all the impacts that you see for the man on the streets.
Okay. So one of the issues tied to our foreign reserves is the naira. Now, the IMF and the World Bank have continued to pressurize the CBN to abolish its multiple foreign exchange management system in order to create equal opportunity for all. So in February, the CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele hinted that it had recognized NAFEX, also known as the INE, as the official rate, and that the currency had been depreciated to about 410 naira against the dollar. In May, the CBN removed the official exchange rate of 379 naira to the dollar from its website. So this led to reports that the bank had devalued the currency to the INE window rate. As things stand right now, Nnamdi, has Nigeria converged the naira? Are we now operating one system officially? What is the rate of the naira that we expect even the CBN to peg it to the dollar?
So officially, we've seen the central bank move to 410 and basically try to marry and measure all the rates for official currency purchases, right? Official dollar market. So whether it's school fees you're going to pay, you're going to customs to make payments and things like that, right? You're buying effects from the central bank. They have pegged rates now at 410, or rather, they are using NAFEX, which basically reflects what the interbank market is doing. But there's still one more market which they still need to converge with, or to try and get some sort of convergence, and that is the parallel market, because the parallel market, which peaked at about 510 sometime earlier on last week, has come back down to about 485. So yes, we can see that there seems to be some action going on to try and get the parallel market to come lower, but there's still quite a bit of a spread between the parallel market and the official market. So we're talking about almost about a 20% spread. We need to see that market converge, or those two markets converge, so that we can ensure proper stability of the currency.
All right, Nnamdi, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we'll look at CBN interventions. We'll also look at an idea that was floated by a former CBN governor in terms of the currency. And what does it all mean in terms of going forward? What projections are we putting forward for Nigeria's external reserves in the coming months? This is Business Edge. We'll be right back. This is Business Edge, and today's show is on Nigeria's external reserves scorecard. My guest, Nnamdi Nwozu, is with me. Nnamdi, we've seen the CBN intervene in many ways in the past, but none really seem to be working to reduce the apparent free fall of the naira, nor help shore up the economy. A recent report has also laid the blame squarely at the feet of the government and the CBN for what ails the naira and what ails our economy. Is there something the CBN is getting wrong or failing to do? Is there nothing they've done that has worked, even if just a bit? What do you think?
Well, they have various strategies there have been various strategies by the central bank that seem to have had a bit of success. So, for instance, creating an INE window definitely helped with reduced pressure on the currency when it was introduced. But I think the challenge beyond the central bank point also comes strongly from the fiscal side of things. The truth about it is that, as you can see, for instance, you have your dwindling reserves. We still depend largely on crude oil for our exports. A lot of the things that we used to export back in the days, which is even included in the World Bank reports, things like cocoa, palm oil, granules, things like that, which were the mainstay with regards to FX and the mainstay of the economy years back, were all abandoned when we struck oil. So we need to get our exports up beyond just crude oil. And I think when that happens, we start to see a lot more of dollars coming in, which will help build up our reserves. And when that happens, then the central bank will have a lot more armory to defend the currency. However, it's also good to note that we need to go back to a proper, flexible, two-way quote FX market. By the time that starts to happen and you start to have price discovery, proper price discovery, and have trading activities going on, then you most probably start to see a lot more interest coming in from the foreign investors. One thing foreign investors are always particular about is liquidity. They want to be able to go in and go out of whichever economy or country that they are participating in. So that is a major thing for them.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of that in reading up about this. There are a lot of investors who have had to reinvest in the economy because they have not been able to repatriate their funds. Is this also a situation of we're not ready to actually think outside the box? So there was a time when Professor Charles Soludo, a former governor of the CBN, actually proposed revaluation of the naira, not devaluation, but revaluation of the naira by simply removing a digit from the currency. And I think he was talking about the zero. Have we moved past the time for such a solution? Are we ready to think of things not being done, not the typical things we've tried before, and really think outside of the box to spare our economy to greater heights?
Yeah, so, like a redenomination or decimalization of the currency was suggested, I think it was in 2017 by former Central Bank Governor Soludo. If we look at Ghana, for instance, which decided to go ahead and do this, and they ended up pegging their currency, making it one cedi to the dollar. If you look at where it is today, from 2007 when they did that to date, they've suffered about 83% devaluation. If you look at the naira from 2007 to date, it's been a 69% devaluation. So I would say that even without doing that, the currency, the Nigerian naira, seems to have performed better than that. So I'm not sure that really solves your problem, because what happens is that with that also you can see the currency devalue a lot faster, because people, a 5% move today in the naira versus the fact when you have a small movement, when you've done your redenomination and removed a few zeros, you see that at that point in time, you're going to see your currency flying a lot faster, which we can see from what has happened in Ghana. So they're now at 5.83 Ghanaian cedi to a dollar versus 1 Ghanaian cedi to a dollar, which they had done in 2007. So I'm not sure from that perspective that's really helped. I'm not sure how much it helps us as a country. I think the way to go will be about increasing our exports, getting things right on the fiscal side, and improving the security situation so that we start to see foreign investors look at Nigeria as a destination, investment destination, and start to come back in again.
All right, let me share another idea. So we know that the currency value dances to the rhythm of demand and supply. And as you talked about Ghana and what I guess we would say experimented with, we've seen countries that intentionally keep their currencies weak. You have Japan, South Korea, and China, which are some of the highest exporting countries in the world, but their currencies continue to remain weak when compared to their peers like the dollar, the pound, and the euro. And we know that is intentional. It's intentional manipulation. But is there something they're doing that we should consider trying as well? Is there something we can learn from that?
Well, one of the key things is what you mentioned, which is that they're major exporting countries. So they keep their currency weak so that the goods, the items, whatever their exports are cheaper and easier to afford for those who have the stronger currencies in other countries. So that continues to ensure their exports continue to rise, and which helps the economy. So for Nigeria to even consider that, we need to ensure that we have things to export. So I mean, beyond just crude oil, right? So we need to ensure that we, like I mentioned earlier, we go back to things like agriculture, so things like cocoa and coal. We've talked about, we've seen gold in some parts of the country. We need to get our exports up. When you get our exports up, at that point in time, you can consider weakening your currency. And then when that happens, then you start to see massive exports. A lot of people start to show interest in Nigeria. But right now, if you weaken the currency, you don't really get to gain because you don't have anything to export.
All right, let's talk about some more data. So according to the World Bank's Nigeria Development Update report, economic growth of 1.8% is projected for 2021 instead of the earlier 1.2%. The report also urges reforms considering our population forecast of 2.6%. Many analysts say that Nigeria actually needs double-digit economic growth figures, or at least upwards of 6 to 7% for a sustained period of time. What kind of reforms, economic and fiscal reforms, do you think the country needs? Given 2.6% for population growth, your economic growth is even half of that most of the time. We are obviously creating more people than we're creating jobs or opportunities. What kind of reforms do you think we should be looking at?
Yes, sir, I totally agree with you. You shouldn't have your population outstripping your GDP growth. If you look at a lot of developing countries, even some developed countries, look at China, maybe at about 7%. Look at countries like Ghana, not too far from us, about 5.58. Ivory Coast is about 6.2. So you have some of these similar economies, and their GDP rate, growth rate is much higher. So definitely we need to get back on track. And once again, I mean, we've talked about it in trying to increase our exports, improve security situation. You have to create an enabling environment to help foster that GDP growth. So the policy that we've seen of recent, things like banning Twitter, basically sort of ends up reducing your GDP growth because it affects the IT industry, which we all know is a major industry globally across the world. So we need to create a more enabling environment for investors locally, for local investors, for international investors. We need to sort out things like power, we need to sort out security. Then you start to see that your GDP growth would definitely, start to increase and start to shoot up. It would be good to look at sample countries. What has China done, or what did China do to ensure that they were able to keep their GDP growth at good levels? What was the secret to their success? So we can take that as a case study and start to look at it and try and figure out what we can copy, right, to ensure that we can get the same kind of growth down here in Nigeria.
All right. So finally, Nnamdi, before we go, we've seen the decline for the past 3 months so far. Do you think the next reading will follow this trend? Do you expect any sort of boost possibly in the short or medium term if we don't see things that will aid international oil price recovery so that Nigeria can benefit that way?
Well, I think that the fact just reopening will basically reopen the economy and things are beginning to pick up. You'll definitely start to see some GDP growth. Economic activities will recover. Yes, maybe not at the levels at which it was before to COVID, because you have a number of companies that would have, packed up and shut shop and not reopening again. And we've seen unemployment rates also rise. But just the fact that you started to reopen your economy, the world has started to reopen, I definitely think that on its own is enough to start to push up the GDP for us as a country. But we just hope that some of the pointers, like I mentioned before, we know that the president recently spoke about ensuring that or improving security situation in the country, and we hope that that can happen, because for me that is one major thing or one major obstacle we're facing now.
All right, Sinamdi Nwisu, always a pleasure. Thank you, and we'll see you sometime soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So before we wrap things up on today's show, let's get you straight into NC4 to watch. These are a few stories we're keeping our eyes on right here on Business Edge. We start with this. The lack of a permanent CEO and the suspension of Ghana's mining operations, or Ghana Mine Operations, I beg your pardon, has pushed Anglo Gold Ashanti stocks down by 35%, making it the worst performing stock in the 113 company Bloomberg World Mining Index. 5 months after former CEO Kelvin Dushnisky announced his resignation, the company's chairperson quit, and in May, it had to suspend operations at its Ghana mine following an accident. 8 out of the 19 common market for Eastern and Southern Africa countries have so far signed the solemn commitment for the establishment of the single African air transport market. The 8 are the Democratic Republic of Congo, Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, Eswatini, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. The initiative is led by the African Union through the African Civil Aviation Commission. The International Monetary Fund has doubled its economic growth forecast for Zimbabwe, citing a bumper harvest, improved power supply, and an increase in manufacturing and construction. According to the fund, Zimbabwe's economy is projected to expand by about 6% this year, adding that an economic recovery is underway in 2021. This economic forecast is closer to the projection of the Southern African country's treasury that gross domestic product will increase 7.4% this year. And finally, Uganda's financial regulator is working to boost fintech innovation in the country, as the Bank of Uganda recently unveiled a regulatory sandbox to help fintechs develop new products and services. The country expects to boost the uptake of electronic payments, digital financial services, and to promote financial inclusion in the country. And that's it on this edition of Business Edge. Don't forget to follow us on social media at News Central TV. If you've missed any of our conversations this week that delved into financial, economic, and business stories from here on the continent, head to our website as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun. I'll see you 11 a.m. West African time, Monday morning.